I'm Polly Warren and welcome to the Positive Perimenopause podcast. This is the place for some positive inspiration to help you through the rollercoaster ride of perimenopause. I truly believe that with the right support, knowledge and wellness tools, you can feel your best yet, because I'm learning this life phase can be a truly exciting and often pivotal time of life. With every episode, my mission is to support and empower you to own your menopause, because it's time to start taking care of the most important person, and yes, that's you. So thank you for being here and sharing your time with me. Now let's dive in. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. How are you doing? I hope you've had a good week. Here in the UK, we've just had our second long bank holiday weekend, and this time was because of the King's coronation, which I must admit I watched and delved into. And yeah, I think whatever you think about the royal family, it was a real display of pomp and ceremony and all those things which make us very British. So yeah, it was a really interesting, fascinating spectacle to watch. I went to a party actually on Saturday night, which the theme was to come dressed as something regal. And my husband and I decided to go as two members of the band Queen. So I went as Freddie Mercury and my husband went as Brian May. And yeah, it was quite good fun. Wearing a moustache and having a microphone. I absolutely loved it. Those that know me know that I absolutely love dressing up and fancy dress. It really appeals to, I love the creativity side of it. But I also absolutely love the fact it just allows you to be really silly and it's just really good fun. I know lots of people really hate it, but I absolutely love it. And thankfully, so does my husband. We've decided it's all about the little details when it's fancy dress, and the more homespun, the absolute better. Also this week, I've changed up my eating, my breakfast routine, because I've been reading the Glucose Goddess's new book, and I speak about the Glucose Goddess in episode number 43 when I talk all about balancing blood sugar. And then I also talk about the importance of learning how to balance our blood sugar, particularly as we go through perimenopause. It can make such a massive difference to how we're feeling, to how our hormones react and behave during this transition which we're going through. And one thing which the Glucose Goddess talks about, one of the hacks she suggests, is to eat a savoury breakfast. Now, I have for a number of years been eating a very similar breakfast most mornings, which is Greek yogurt, berries, a bit of granola, although low sugar granola, and seeds and nuts. But I still get these sort of odd cravings throughout the afternoon for something sweet. And so I wanted to try one of these hacks for the Glucose Goddess recommended, which is to have a savoury breakfast, because I really am getting fed up with these cravings, these sweet cravings I'm getting. So this week I've delved in, and what I've decided to do is have a savoury breakfast. So yesterday I had a really delicious omelette, 2-egg omelette, which had kind of red onion, it had red pepper, spinach, mushrooms in. And then today I had some avocado and smoked salmon, mozzarella and tomatoes. But because I still love my Greek yogurt and berries and all the nuts and seeds and the flaxseed, I've decided I'm going to have that as a pudding after something for lunch. So I'm going to let you know how it goes. Yesterday, I must admit, I didn't feel hungry once. I didn't have any cravings. So I'm really excited to see how this goes. This week's episode is all about sleep. Now, we do have a previous episode when I speak to sleep expert Salika Rotso about sleep, but I think it's really important to speak to a wide range of people, even on the same subject, because sometimes we need to hear things from different people. Obviously, everyone's comes at things from very different perspectives and angles. And so this week I was very excited to speak to Dr. Maja Shaedel. I hope I said that right, Maja. Maja is an experienced clinical psychologist with a specialism in insomnia, sleep difficulties and trauma. And she is also co-founder of the Good Sleep Clinic. Now, we know that sleep is one of the most common symptoms of the perimenopause, with 40 to 60% of women reporting difficulties either staying asleep or waking up during the night. There are so many knock-on effects to a bad night's sleep, which makes it super important to resolve these issues. In this episode, Maja sheds light on some of the most common sleep issues many of us experience during perimenopause, and she gives us some suggestions on what we can do to help ourselves. So if you're struggling with sleep at the moment, just know that there are things you can do. There may also be some underlying reasons why this is. So you might have tried all the sleep hygiene hacks and thinking none of these are working for me. So this episode really is for you. So without further ado, please welcome the brilliant Maja Shaedel. Maja, it's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Polly. It's really good to be here chatting with you.
Oh, well, I'm excited to get stuck in today to talk all things sleep because I've been binging on all your content on Instagram, and there's so many useful posts that you put out, so much useful information about sleep, but also specifically for women who are entering into this sort of perimenopausal phase of life. So yes, very excited to get stuck into this today. So I thought a very good place to start was just to find out a little bit more about you and how you have come to be an expert on sleep, and why also you kind of part of what you do is working with women as they're kind of reaching those menopause years.
Yeah, absolutely. I've worked as a clinical psychologist for years now. So I've actually had a bit of an interesting route to get to where I am in sleep. And I actually worked for a long time with children and adolescents. So my main specialism when I first qualified was working in CAMS, which is the kind of child and adolescent mental health services. So I was there for years and always realised how important sleep was and what a challenge it was for teenagers, especially when their circadian rhythms are all over the place. And then I started to move into working with more trauma and actually people who'd had more trauma and they were affected by trauma. And part of that, I started working in a sleep disorder centre in West Sussex. And it was a big unit where we provided treatment really for people with insomnia and other sleep-related difficulties. And one of the things that I was so struck by was that we had so many referrals for insomnia, and yet there was hardly any provision across the whole country on the NHS for insomnia. So actually, we were one of the only sites that would offer evidence-based treatment on the NHS for anyone with insomnia. I thought this was really weird because we've put some money recently. There's been money that's gone into mental health services, although they are generally classically underfunded. But actually, there's an understanding, at least, that mental health problems really require a lot of, support and input. And then there's the medical side, where we know that there's lots of medical services that often need lots of people, working in. But sleep seemed to fall in between the two. So it wasn't getting picked up in the mental health services as a diagnosis that was treatable. But it also wasn't something that was funded in these kind of more medical services and these hospital trusts. So I sort of was thinking, how is this possible? Because it has such a negative, such a dramatic impact on people. And one of the things that occurred to me as I was doing some of the assessments with the sleep clinicians was that the menopause and the perimenopause just wasn't considered at all. So there were no questions about it at all. So we'd have people who'd come in and they'd be, classically going through that period, that menopause transition. And we'd be doing a thorough assessment of everything that could contribute, whether or not that's kind of a history of sleep problems and any other kind of medical difficulties that could be impacting on it, like restless legs or sleep apnea. But there was this major thing that I felt like just wasn't being addressed or talked about. And I got talking with my sister, Zoe, who's a GP, and she was specialising at the time in women's health. And I was saying, you know, this is interesting, isn't it? And actually, Zoe was saying, you know, I see so many women with insomnia, and, you know, what do we do? So we got together and we were kind of giving each other tips. So I would suggest some of the kind of psychological stuff that was really helpful. And then Zoe would suggest some of the how we might taper off sleep medication. So one of the big things that we really want to help people to do often is to try and come off sleep medication. And often lots of people really want that, but don't have any other solutions for it. So we were kind of giving each other tips on, you know, what to do with this. And then we just had so many people that were asking for help that we just had this sort of brainwave where we were like, why don't we just set up something where we can get together and actually really tackle this together? So we set up the Good Sleep Clinic, and that was back in 2019. And we both had small kids and were pretty sleep deprived ourselves. But we were like, this is something that we really, really believe in. And so we set up the Good Sleep Clinic, and really it's just kind of gone from there. And I would say that because we've had such a focus on providing evidence-based treatment, so, you know, we're really interested in making sure what we do really works. I think that's been, it's really kind of meant that we've had lots of people who've really kind of sought us out to try and help with their sleep. So we're really, really pleased with the Good Sleep Clinic. But what's come from that, I think, is this understanding that so many women are really struggling with their sleep. So it's one of the most classic symptoms of the perimenopause is sleeplessness and insomnia, and just the amount of women who come through menopause services and women's services complaining of sleep problems, but actually there not being that much there for them. So that's kind of like a roundabout way of how we've kind of got to where we're at now. And actually now we're kind of developing more treatments for women with menopause. So we're doing a video course, and we've got lots of kind of face-to-face clinics, and now we've got associates. And so actually we're really, really focused on trying to help women through this period, because one of the big things that women say is that if I could just get my sleep sorted, I honestly think the rest of the process would be okay. But the sleep is the thing that's really like disrupting my whole life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it really is. From all the women who I've spoken to or who I've worked with, and also from my own experience, you know, I know how disruptive it could be. And I think when you have if you have children and small children, okay, we all know what it's like to be sleep deprived. But I think there's something, you know, you've got all those other hormones helping you through that stage to a certain extent. And I think when you get to perimenopause, actually you kind of think you're through that, and then you're then thrown back into these terrible nights of just not sleeping, the worry, the anxiety that goes with that, about worrying about feeling tired the next day, because women in midlife have a lot on their plate. Absolutely. So let's dive into this. I asked some women in my Facebook group, you know, if they had any questions for you, which maybe we'll have a look at the end. The two things which really come up again and again is not being able to go to sleep. So this sort of insomnia, this feeling of insomnia, but then also if for those people who can go to sleep, but then they wake up in the middle of the night and then they can't go back to sleep. So maybe you could just start by telling us why these are happening, particularly as we go through this perimenopause transition.
Yeah, sure. And actually, you're right to point out those two different kinds of insomnia. So we generally talk about insomnia referring to both the difficulty falling asleep and also the difficulty maintaining sleep, so staying asleep. So anyone that wakes up at 3 or 4 in the morning and they can't get back to sleep, or anyone that's waking up throughout the night at various points. And generally, women going through the perimenopause describe both of those, although the majority talk a lot about the 3 and 4 a.m. wakenings. So why is that happening? And I think it's such a good question, because it's a very marked thing that happens in the perimenopause. Now, there's lots of different reasons that go into this. And I suppose in a way, what I would really want people to kind of take from this is the sense that actually it might not be any one thing, because there are so many different factors that kind of affect it. But we know that the changes in our estrogen and progesterone during the menopause transition, do you mean that it can create vasomotor symptoms like the hot flashes? So we know that this can push our temperature up, and of course during the night that can happen, and that can cause a hot flash in the middle of the night. But what's interesting is that in order to go to sleep, to begin with, we actually need several different physical reactions and responses to occur. We need our breathing rate to slow down. We need our muscles to relax. We need our core body temperature to drop by 1 to 2 degrees. And we need our heart rate to slow down. And these are all things that happen naturally, generally speaking, and they start to happen towards the end of the evening when the sun goes down, and there's a rise in our hormone melatonin, which people may have heard of. It's the sleepy hormone, and it signals to us that it's time for sleep. And in order to go to sleep, what if you think about evolution and when we were cave people, we would have needed to have felt safe in order to fall unconscious, where essentially would have been really vulnerable to attack from a predator or another sort of rival group. So generally, we need to believe that we're safe, and that all those kind of reactions, like our heart rate slowing, these are all a sign that we are safe. So we need our body at least to think that we're safe and our temperature to come down. Now, if our temperature spikes at all at any point, but certainly during the night, what that does is it signals to our body, I'm not safe. This is not time to be asleep. You need to wake up immediately and protect yourself. So essentially, as soon as we have that hot flush, it means that we then become awake. And of course, the change in that experience, physical experience, wakes us up. So one of the big areas is really thinking about, are the hot flushes waking you up and disrupting your sleep in the first place? So I think that is really, really a big one that happens for people. But what then kicks in is, why don't we go back to sleep? And that, I think, is where I sort of come in with the psychology, because I think that what a lot of people describe during that time is a massive increase in their anxiety and a kind of catastrophic thinking, a sort of, oh no, I'm awake. Am I going to get back to sleep? How am I going to cope tomorrow? I've got so much going on. I need to be able to manage everything that's happening. And that process of thinking and worrying about not going back to sleep and not coping, and perhaps even your mind clicking onto other things that you're struggling with, in the early hours of the morning, that process is then what keeps us awake. Because as soon as you have those thoughts and concerns, it's alerting, it allows our brain to say, yes, I'm awake. Your body then starts to click on, your heart rate increases, your fight, flight, freeze response is engaged, and that's the response to threat or danger. And essentially, our body just doesn't feel safe to be asleep anymore. So even if you're desperately trying to go to sleep, so I speak to women who say, I'm just desperately trying to get rid of all the thoughts in my mind and just go back to sleep, but it doesn't work. And of course, one of the reasons it doesn't work is because by that point, your whole alarm system has gone off, essentially, to say, this is not safe, you can't go back to sleep. And it's a real challenge to get back to sleep at that point. So I would say, in a way, we've got to then think, how do we get around that, when our mind has essentially clicked on? And the other thing that happens in the middle of the night is our frontal lobes shut down, essentially. And that's where we do all our rational thinking. So I don't know if you've ever had an experience like this. In fact, I had an experience about this the other day, where you're so irrational in the middle of the night. And it's almost like you start to catastrophize. And then the next morning you think about them and you think, oh, that was a bit crazy. Like, why was I thinking it was so bad? But the other night I had one of these. I had got really cold before going to bed, and I think I'd gone out in the garden or something, and I just was a bit chilly. And I thought, in order for me to go to sleep, I need to make sure I'm really warm. So I put on my bed socks, and I had like 3 duvets on top of me, and I had like a blanket, and I really snuggled up, and I was properly warm and snuggly, and I fell asleep brilliantly. And then during the night, I woke up and I suddenly felt like something was wrong. Oh no, what's wrong? Something is wrong. My heart rate is really going, like, what's going on? And then I started to think, this is how I feel sometimes if I'm going to be sick. And then I thought, I'm going to be sick. And then I suddenly thought, I had people over for lunch today. I had a family over for lunch. There's like, I'm going to have given 8 people food poisoning. So then I started thinking, oh no, I'm going to have to text everyone tomorrow and just check everyone's okay, that I haven't given them food poisoning. And in this process, I'd kind of flung off the duvet and my bed socks and just kind of, got myself out of this like tight sort of cocoon I was in. And after a while, my body temperature obviously just came back down. And I suddenly was like, oh, I was just hot. I'm fine. I wasn't sick. No one's sick. I haven't given anyone food poisoning. I just baked myself. And I think that essentially that kind of irrational thinking, I was like, this is what happens.
Yeah.
But this is exactly what happens, in the middle of the night.
A very quick break to ask you to hit the follow or subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you're enjoying this episode, I'd be super grateful if you could hit those stars and rate it too. Thank you. Oh, I know it far too well. There was a period of time, this was a few years ago now, I was waking up a lot, drenched in sweat, like really disgusting, so horrible. But then, so you kind of get up, I would kind of get a towel. I didn't want to wake my husband and, like, oh, I'm going to wake everybody up. I don't want anyone else to hear because I don't want any kids waking up. And then we'd just sort of lie there going, just doing exactly what you just did, just catastrophizing about the smallest things. And it's a horrible feeling when you're in it. And then when you wake in the morning, you're just like, what was I doing? It's just crazy. But it's nice to know that there is a reason for that it's not just you being, over the top and being irrational. There is a reason for that, which is reassuring, I think.
I think so. I think it is reassuring, although I think it's harder to know how to kind of help it,
Yes. So how can we help it? So when this is happening, what can we do, Maja?
Yeah. So I think there's a few different things that really, really help. So one of the therapies that I do is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, and that's sometimes shortened to CBTI. And that is essentially the evidence-based gold standard treatment. So the NICE guidelines suggest for insomnia, that's the treatment. So that is essentially something that really does help people. And the way it works is by really addressing the behaviors that we do that can kind of get in the way of sleep, but also the thinking errors that we can kind of get into as well. I'll give you a really classic example of one of the behavioral sort of mistakes that we can kind of get into, the bad habits we can get into. I'll give you two examples. One, I think that when people have a bad night of sleep, they immediately think, I know, I've got to make sure I've got to go to bed early, get an early night, really prioritize my sleep. And they've got such good intentions. The problem with going to sleep early, or rather going to bed early, is that it doesn't give you enough time awake during the day to be active and building up what we call sleep pressure, which is essentially the kind of tiredness that we build up throughout the day. So from the moment we wake up in the morning, we're building up sleep pressure and sleep drive. And that's been associated with a chemical in the brain called adenosine. And we found that by the end of the day, we've got this really big load of adenosine. And that's the stuff that helps us to fall asleep and stay asleep for the whole night. Now, if you think about it, you want a kind of a really good amount of this. But if you're going to bed early, you're not getting enough of that because you're actually cutting out on an hour or two of being awake. And that would have been time that you would have been building up more sleep pressure. So actually, sometimes people don't have enough sleep pressure to either fall asleep in the first place, or sometimes they're tired enough to fall asleep, but they didn't have enough sleep pressure to stay asleep for the whole night. So they might go to bed at 9 p.m, fall asleep because they're tired, but actually then they're awake at 3 a.m. and can't get back to sleep. So I would say that's a really classic one where we're trying to do something to help ourselves, but actually we're getting in the way of what's really good for us. And another example is when we lie in bed awake, worrying, fretting, thinking, looking at the time, checking our phone, essentially staying in bed. And what that does is our body and our brain are quite good, really good at making associations. So when we go to bed, generally, we build up a really good association where our brain essentially sees our bed and says, right, that's where I sleep. So you get into bed and you've already got into a kind of a habit of falling asleep and going to sleep. Now, if we have a period of time where we're not falling asleep easily, but actually we're awake in our bed, your brain starts to develop this new association with being awake and being in bed. And that means that the next night, your brain is like, yeah, sleep is one of the things that happens in bed, but actually I'm also awake in bed a lot of the time. So it's more likely to be able to fall to that position of being awake because it's a familiar experience. So actually, we need to kind of break those negative associations with being awake and being in bed, which is the other reason why we often suggest that people don't do things like eat in their bed or work in their bed. It's really about trying to keep your bed as a sort of sacred sleep place, so that your brain can very much make that strong association between bed and sleep.
So would you recommend then, if you do wake up and you're struggling to go back to sleep, that the best thing to do is to get up?
Exactly.
Okay.
So we have something called the 20-minute rule, which is really that if you're not back to sleep within about 20 minutes, there's actually a really good chance it's going to take you quite a bit longer, because that's often the time that their brains start to click into gear and they start thinking and worrying, and all of a sudden you've gone on to something about how you're worried about your parents, and you've gone off on a tangent. And so actually we say at that point, when you get up out of bed, it does a couple of things. It helps you to essentially reset. So it really helps to break out of those negative, vicious cycles of thinking that we can get into in the middle of the night. And just by getting out of bed, going into another room and, sitting down and reading or looking out the window, whatever it is, something different, you're breaking that kind of way of doing things. And the other thing that's really helpful about it is that, as we were talking about before, the fight, flight, freeze response pushes up your hyperarousal. That's all that kind of heart rate going up, breathing rate going up. And actually lying in bed and thinking about stuff it's quite hard to bring your hyperarousal down when you're doing that. So actually, we really recommend doing something relaxing in that moment. And that might be in another room, reading a book, listening to some music, doing some kind of colouring or knitting or whatever it is that you find relaxing, generally without screens. And actually, it can just be a way of bringing your hyperarousal down, bringing your heart rate down, your breathing rate down, your core body temperature down, so that when you do go back to bed, you're more likely to fall asleep. So absolutely getting out of bed. The thing is, it's really hard to do because it's just not very nice, is it, getting out of bed? And I do really feel for people when I say to do this. I can see their faces like, no. But it is a really helpful strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the idea of getting out of bed, if you've got a good book on the go, or if you're, doing something creative like knitting. Actually, it's quite a nice thing to go and do and just take your mind off what's going on, and hopefully soon you'll fall back to sleep again. With regards to this sleep pressure, I'm interested to know more about this, because I think one of the things I always used to wonder was when or still do wonder, when I have a really bad night's sleep, I wonder in the next day, right, what's the best strategy for giving myself the best chance of having a good night's sleep the next night? So is it to sleep in a little bit later so I'm not going to be so tired for the rest of the day if I can? Is it to have a nap? Or is it just to kind of do everything I normally would do and just sort of, do the best I possibly can on a little sleep?
Yeah, you're absolutely right to ask this question, Polly, because I actually think this is the difference between us prioritizing how we're going to feel the next day versus the next several weeks. And I think that really it comes down to kind of short-term discomfort. I was going to say short-term pain, but short-term discomfort for long-term gain. So you're absolutely right to think that actually, if you set your wake-up time at the same time each day, you're really protecting that process. Because what it means is that, say you have a really disrupted night and you've woken up several times and your alarm goes off at 7 o'clock and you're just feeling exhausted, and you just think, if I can just go back to sleep for another hour, I think I'll be sorted for the day. Well, the difficulty with that, so absolutely, no doubt about it. I'm sure if you can go back to sleep for another hour that day, you will feel better, for sure. But what does that do for the following night and the following night and the following night? So I always encourage people that even if they've had a really difficult night, it's really important to still get up at the same time, because then you're resetting for the next night, and you can feel a bit smug that you know that for the next night you're going to have some really good sleep pressure built up, and that's going to really help to reset your sleep. I think that so many people talk about a kind of really trying to grab sleep when they can, and then their sleep is disrupted at other times. We sometimes call this social jet lag, which is when we have disrupted sleep, say during the week, and then at the weekends we catch up on our sleep. Now, the problem with this is that when you catch up with your sleep, it's not without its downsides. Of course, when you're catching up on sleep, you're actually awake for less time during the day. So you've got less sleep pressure for the following night. So, for example, if you're waking up on a Saturday, say, I don't know, 9 a.m. or a Sunday at 9 a.m., and you usually wake up at 7 a.m. and you've given yourself an extra 2 hours sleep, that means that you've got 2 hours less during the day to build up sleep pressure. So say you go to bed at your normal time, at say 10:30, and 10:30, 11 is often what people go to bed, and you don't feel tired enough, you don't feel sleepy enough. So you get into bed because you know it's your bedtime and you've got Monday the next morning, you want to get a really good night's sleep before Monday, and you're lying in bed and you're thinking, oh no, I can't sleep, I'm not tired enough. And then your thoughts start kicking into gear and you start feeling worried and anxious about the fact that you need your sleep in order to be okay at work tomorrow. And I think that what happens is that's when we get into a really tricky kind of pattern where we might be getting more sleep at the weekend, but what does that mean for our sleep for the rest of the week? And that is what happens over weeks and weeks and months, and it can really escalate so that people find that they might have a really good night's sleep. It's quite common for people in assessment to say to me, I'll have 2 nights of brilliant sleep and then the rest is completely awful. And I will say to them, that's not unrelated. The fact that you're getting 2 really good nights sleep is not unrelated to the fact that your sleep is then disrupted. That is contributing, sadly. The fact that you're getting 2 good nights of sleep, what does that mean? Does that mean like a really long sleep of sort of 8 or 9 hours? And it might be that part of the treatment is kind of evening out the sleep over the week so that you're getting really good but not excessive sleep on every day.
So what else can we do then to build up this sleep pressure during the day?
Well, exercise is a really good way. And actually, I would say that just generally being active is a brilliant way of building up sleep pressure. So I always encourage people to, even just going for a short walk. One of the things that people quite like to do in the summer is go for an evening walk. And it's just about getting okay to not raining at the moment. So, maybe that might be something that people could do, even if it's just for 20 minutes. It's a really nice way of just getting your activity levels up. I would just say a little word of warning for people, anyone who works from home. I think that sometimes our activity levels can take a plummet. It's great if you're doing things like, exercise classes, or maybe you like doing other exercise like running or the gym. But I would say that anyone who has switched to the working from home, it does mean that I think often people just move about less. We're just going just between a few rooms rather than kind of walking to the bus stop or the train and walking up a flight of stairs. And I think there's a lot of activity that gets a bit missed when we're working from home. So that's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about, say you are really, really tired, or you've had a really late night, you've been out or you've done something, so you are feeling absolutely exhausted. some people swear by a quick power nap. I mean, what would you say about that? Because I've never been a napper. I just can't seem to do it. But my husband is a great napper at the weekends. He'll just sort of sit down and have like a 10-minute nap and go, oh yeah, that was great. I feel amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think naps are amazing. And, even a 15-minute nap has shown to improve cognitive ability. So definitely they can really help with your day. But if you are someone who struggles with insomnia, they are not recommended. And usually what I would say is anyone coming to my clinic, I would normally suggest that the naps are likely to be getting in the way of them getting their sleep back on track. So I would say that if you don't struggle with sleep generally and you like to have a nap, then great, go for it. If you are someone who struggles with insomnia, I would see if you can kind of lay off them for a while. The big one that I think that people really struggle with is the 9 p.m. falling asleep on the sofa nap. So lots of people saying that they're so sleepy around that time and they can just easily fall asleep on the sofa, but then they go up to bed and they can't get to sleep. And again, there's a couple of different reasons why that happens. Partly being relaxed and watching TV and having your feet up and relax. You're very relaxed usually at that point. And it's the relaxation that often does mean that people find it easy to fall asleep. But when you go up to bed, you've already dropped some of your sleep pressure because you've fallen asleep on the sofa. So actually a short nap can have a really big dent in your sleep pressure. And actually, I think the research shows that it's disproportionate. So even if you have like a sort of 10-minute nap, it can kind of have a bigger impact in terms of how much time or how long it takes you to fall asleep later when you go to bed. But also, I think our bedrooms start to become places of torment. Sometimes people say, oh, it's just, I'm so exhausted. And then I get up to bed and I just feel wired. I'm just awake and I just don't feel I can go to sleep. And we call that tired but wired. And it's, your body is ready for sleep, but somehow your brain is kicking into gear. And that's often because after a while of not sleeping in your bedroom, we start to develop those negative associations with our bed and our bedroom. We start to sometimes fear going to bed. Actually, what's it going to be like tonight? Is it going to be terrible? Am I going to sleep awfully? So I think that can often happen as well. But with the naps and the sofa, my recommendations for that are, if you can, keep your feet on the ground and sort of sitting in a bit more of an upright position. And that tends to help with falling asleep. Sometimes people find it more helpful to be on a bit more of a harder backed chair. But of course, you are still trying to relax. So you've got to kind of work out what works. And then other times people say that they sort of go for a little wander into the kitchen, get a drink and come back and really try to kind of keep those sofa sleeps down to a minimum.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, Maya, is for anyone who is struggling with sleep, the best thing to do is to get up at the same time every day, is to, despite the night that you've had the night before, is to just do all the things that you normally would. Try not to have a nap and make sure you exercise, you get outside, and then you go to bed at a time when you normally go to bed and just relax. But yet, if you wake up in the night, after 20 minutes, get up, do something quiet, and then go back to sleep again. And do you find that really does iron out a lot of the issues?
I do. I mean, I really, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of all the people that I work with where they really struggle with that. And I would say that, I realize this isn't an easy process. So I'm saying, these are the things to try, but I do understand that for a lot of people, it's a lot harder.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think really plays a role is ongoing hormonal fluctuations, for sure. And that will be having an impact, because that has an impact on things like mood and identity and, feeling sort of able to cope and all of those things that I know that you've talked about with all your other guests on podcasts as well.
That brings me on to a question I'm going to ask from one of the people in my Facebook group. So it was Belinda who asked me this question. So she really started off the chat in the group. And I wonder what you would say to this. And this is to do with hormones, because I know HRT can really help a lot of women with their sleep. But she says I've started taking progesterone capsules at night and applying estrogen cream in the morning. She started with 100 milligrams of progesterone for 6 weeks, and the last few days increased to 200 milligrams on the doctor's advice. I've not had a full night's sleep since starting the progesterone, which is bizarre because progesterone often is the hormone which induces sleep. I fall asleep easily, but consistently wake up around 2:33 a.m. and then wait for a few hours, tossing and turning. Sometimes this awakeness is accompanied by a hot flush and anxiety. Sometimes I'm just awake. Prior to starting the progesterone, I'd wake up at 3 a.m. every night in the week for my period, but now it happens every night. So she's saying, I'm enjoying much happier days with the extra hormone therapy, so don't want to stop the treatment, but I would love a full night's sleep. What can she do?
I really feel for her. That sounds really hard. I mean, what I would say about the way that HRT can be quite helpful for people, and sometimes people find it helpful with this particular issue, is that if it is helpful in managing your vasomotor symptoms, so if it's helpful in changing those hot flushes, and often estrogen can be helpful with that. So the estrogen-based HRT, where you are addressing the hot flushes, if you get that under control, that can often have a really big impact on your nighttime awakenings. So it might be worth you speaking to your doctor about that. It's not just the progesterone, it might be the other side of it, and the estrogen might be helpful in that sense as well. But that's something to discuss with your doctor. I would say that because as a psychologist, I don't prescribe HRT. I often see the women who are either not able to take HRT or who have taken HRT and it hasn't helped, or for people who don't want to take HRT. And I would say that there are other things that you can do as well that are really helpful. And one of the big barriers, I think, to any of these things working is when there's a kind of ongoing anxiety and a difficulty with that kind of those mental health difficulties. And sometimes people have a history of that already, and sometimes it's exacerbated massively during the perimenopause. And that, I would say, is something I see a lot of, lots of women really struggling with anxiety that sometimes they haven't experienced before in that way at all. And all of a sudden they're starting to worry about everything. And of course, it comes hand in hand with life just getting really hard as well, and just so busy. And often what people say is it's like juggling 1,000 plates and feeling bone tired doing it. And I think that's a really, really common experience for people. And I would say for that then I suppose I mean, personally, I then work with people in a kind of one-to-one way for that. And anxiety is one of those things which is a kind of ongoing, that can also really respond really well to therapy like CBT. So I do CBT, but I also do something called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And that's a really great therapy if anyone is interested in looking that one up, because it is really about trying to address some of those unhelpful thought processes. So, for example, if in the middle of the night you get stuck thinking about something, a classic one is, I'm not going to sleep and I'm going to be exhausted tomorrow and it's going to ruin me. I'm going to feel terrible. So often people get quite fixed on thinking about that late at night. Now, what ACT would do is we would first of all, start to notice that we're thinking like that, because what happens is our brain gives us these alerting thoughts that say things like, danger, danger, you're never going to sleep again and it's going to ruin your life. And of course, as we know, our brain doesn't always give us helpful messages. Our brain gives us messages which sometimes are there to be a kind of an alert signal to try and keep us safe. But we need to start telling the difference between what is reality and what is my brain giving me this thought in the middle of the night to try and be helpful, bless it, but it's got it a little bit wrong. So ACT helps you we call it a process of diffusion, where you're trying to separate from your thoughts, really. So you're trying to identify your thoughts. You're then in a position where you can start saying, oh, look, there's that thought I'm having. And so that really helps people to kind of almost to really step away from their thoughts, which can be so hard to do. But if anyone's interested, I think that's a really good one, of trying to separate from your thoughts and also being kind of mindful and bringing your attention to the here and now. Yeah. Sometimes I ask people to kind of focus on even just like their attention on like a button of their pajamas, as opposed to their thoughts. You know, just trying to bring your attention back to the moment can be so helpful.
Yeah, I'm all over that. So yes, as a kind of, this is what I talk about all the time, as meditation can really help you with that process, bring you back to that moment, but also really helps you be able to be aware of what is going on in your mind and sort of almost watch these thoughts pass you by, like traffic on a road or like clouds. Yeah. Also, I'll just add that as a recently trained hypnotherapist, there are other things as well which, as a hypnotherapist, you can talk to your subconscious and really help with the anxiety and things like that to really help you relax. So that might be something to consider as well. But yeah, there are so many different therapies and so many different treatments.
Absolutely, and they've all got really similar kind of threads to them.
Yeah,
those kind of third wave treatments like mindfulness, meditation.
Yeah, exactly. They're all going to help. Okay, I'm going to just have a little look at another question as well. So I've got them up in front of me. So Crystal says, I notice that I wake up feeling drained and low on energy first thing in the morning. And actually, Helen added to this one, even when I'm sleeping well, I still wake up feeling exhausted, and it takes me ages to be able to feel awake. I mean, I would have a few things to say about that with perimenopause, but I'm wondering what you would say, Maja.
I know it's one of those things that I think it's really hard because, of course, when you wake up like that and you feel terrible, you think, oh, this can't be how it should be. Like, how is this exactly how I'm supposed to be feeling? I would say it's not. Although I would say give it sort of 10-15 minutes. So first of all, like often people do describe in the first sort of 10-15 minutes, they do feel quite groggy, and that's quite a common experience. So if you're after a while, you're starting to feel okay, then I would say that that's a good thing. And I almost would sort of just hold in mind that it might just be that initial waking up period. But there are all sorts of things that could be impacting on your sleep quality. And I suppose that's the thing that I would be wanting to kind of look into a bit. So, for example, there are two different types of sleep. We've got our REM sleep, our rapid eye movement sleep, and that happens more in the early hours of the morning, actually, so the latter part of the night. And we get our deep sleep, our non-REM sleep, the kind of really deep bits of that. We get that at the beginning of the night. So as soon as you fall asleep, you tend to plunge into deep sleep. And then as we go through the night, we get more REM sleep. And the REM sleep is really important for our emotional regulation. So that's where we do all our kind of, recalibration of our emotions throughout the day. If you've had a stressful day, that's what the sleep that we need to kind of reset. If we had a particularly sort of strenuous day with, I don't know, anything really, our deep sleep is where we get all our kind of regeneration and restoration of things like proteins and muscles. So we need both types of sleep. There are certain things that can impact on both types of sleep, though. So alcohol actually inhibits our REM sleep. So if you're drinking, so one of the things I do find quite a lot is sometimes people will have a glass of wine to help them fall asleep. But we do know that the alcohol, although it sedates us and helps us to fall asleep, it does often impact on quality of sleep. So I just keep an eye if that's anything that's kind of having a bit of a role. Caffeine as well can impact on our adenosine receptors. So essentially, we know that caffeine can kind of impact on our sleep quality in that way as well. So I would kind of keep an eye on that. Things like if you're eating late at night. So sometimes people eat really late at night, and that can kind of have a bit of an impact in terms of their digestion and their metabolism, and that can impact on sleep quality. So generally, we tend to say if you can eat maybe 2 hours before you go to bed. And then if you're having an early dinner, sometimes people say they have an early tea with the kids, and then they find that they're hungry by the time they go to bed. Generally, what we'd say is that if you're finding you're hungry at bedtime, it's best to preempt that, and maybe an hour or so before have a really good snack of something like Greek yogurt or some nuts or something. Nothing too kind of high carbohydrate, sort of high energy in that sense, that could play havoc with your metabolism. So there are certain things that can get in the way of your sleep quality, but the other things that there can get in the way of sleep quality as well, which might be worth looking into, is if you have any kind of restless leg syndrome. So any kind of limb movements which might be a bit jerky. I'm not talking about the jerks that you get when you're just about to fall asleep or you wake up. They're quite normal, but more the sort of, I can't rest because I have to move my leg. And the other thing is that sleep apnea, there's a big hike in sleep apnea in the perimenopause and menopause. And that's the other thing to keep in mind. If you've got any kind of sleep disordered breathing, or you feel that you're gasping for breath at any point, perhaps you're struggling to breathe, or your partner says that you sounds like you stop breathing at all during the night, and if you wake up with a dry mouth or a headache, those are things to kind of keep an eye out for with those.
And actually, I've got a whole episode coming up. I spoke to Dr. Louise Oliver, who specialises in breathing and helping women at perimenopause, because she's discovered that it really is becoming more and more of an issue for women, because lack of estrogen, affects our muscles, and so we have muscles in how we breathe. And so that's an episode I've already recorded that hasn't come out yet, so that's a really good one, to all about sleep apnea and sleep disordered breathing and all that. So yeah, really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, those are all things I was going to say. And actually, yeah, I mean, when you have a snack before you go to sleep, yeah, a good protein snack is good, because it's going to stabilize your blood sugar more, because you don't want to have any sort of blood sugar dips in the night, because that's going to spike your cortisol as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm going to just have a little look through these questions and see if there's something else we haven't answered. There's Daisy, I think this is the last one actually. So she says, for me, the issue is very vivid dreams, so that I don't feel rested when I wake up. How do I stop this so I'm in a longer, deeper sleep?
So vivid dreams are a really interesting one. And I think it's worth, again, looking into whether or not there's anything that could be impacting on your REM sleep. So any kind of thing that you're eating or drinking that could be impacting on that. The REM sleep happens, as I said, it's sort of in the early hours just before you wake up. And there was a really interesting phenomenon in lockdown where people were reporting that they were getting more vivid dreams. And they tried to work out why this was. And we think it was because on average, people were getting slightly longer sleeps during lockdown, because we weren't getting up for work in the same way. And elongating how much time people were in bed and sleeping in the morning actually led to people having more vivid dreams. So there is something about when you're waking up. And what I would say to Daisy is it might be worth trying to think about your circadian rhythm and having that in line with your wake up time. So for example, we know that 25 to 30% of us are night owls, so we're sort of better at night and like a bit of a lion. 25 to 30% of us are morning larks, and we're much better in the mornings, and then 40 to 50% are somewhere in the middle. Now, if Daisy, for example, has an earlier circadian rhythm, so circadian rhythm is like our body clock, and she's better off waking up a bit earlier, it might be about trying to time her wake up times so that it kind of feels like it's fitting with her circadian rhythm. One of the difficult things that we have in society generally is trying to match our wake up time and going to sleep time to our own personal circadian rhythm. And sometimes that can be quite tricky to do. So I would suggest to Daisy just maybe playing around a little bit with what time she wakes up. If it feels possible, maybe bringing her wake up time a little bit earlier, going to bed a little bit earlier, and she could try and see if that fits with her circadian rhythm a little bit better. Or just waking up 15 minutes earlier and just seeing if that has an impact as well. I think it's largely to do with that the early morning time that has a reaction to that. And the other thing I suppose I would just watch out for is if she's got an increase in stress in her life, and there's other things that are going on, it might be about trying to address those as well, because often what we find is that if we don't manage the difficult things that happen in the day, they're going to come out somewhere, and sleep is inevitably where they come out. And this is such an issue, I think, especially in the perimenopause, because we're so busy, like everyone is so busy. It's like, how do you have time to do anything, like let alone process your feelings? But actually putting some time aside in the sort of early evening where you can really have jot down even what's happened during the day, what's going on, like what do you preempt is going to come up later on at night, like actually what's going to really affect you, and actually getting it out there. It means that your sleep is then a little bit freer, so it doesn't have to process all those really difficult things that happen during the day.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, just even if you spend 10 minutes before you go to bed getting out there, it could really help you have such a better night's sleep. Yeah, it's a
Absolutely.
no-brainer, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Funnily enough, we haven't talked once about sleep hygiene throughout this whole conversation, which actually I think is a good thing because I think most people know what good sleep hygiene is. And I mean, I'm presuming they do, it's kind of going to bed in a cooler room. It's not looking at technology for an hour before you go to bed, dimming the lights, all that sort of thing. I think it's obviously important, Maya, would you say? But actually, there are many more reasons why you can do all of that and then still have a bad night's sleep. And I think, as you've spoken about a lot during this conversation, there's so much more to it than just
I'm
sleep
so pleased
hygiene.
you mentioned sleep hygiene, Polly, because one of the things is that I think people can get quite frustrated sometimes because they say, I'm doing everything. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to. I'm following all the sleep hygiene, rules. And like you say, it's all that really good stuff. And it's not to say it's not important. You're absolutely right. It is important. But what we now know is that the evidence shows that even if you're doing all of the sleep hygiene, it doesn't impact on insomnia. So if you have insomnia, the sleep hygiene doesn't touch the sides. And I hope for some people, if you do have insomnia, that is a relief for you in some way, or something a bit validating about that, because I know so many people feel quite frustrated that they're doing what they see as everything. They've read all the books, they've read the kind of the news articles, and they're kind of trying to fit to every, idea of what's helpful for their sleep. And yet it's still not working. So if that's you, then I really would advise then sort of actually doing some CBTI, because if you've got insomnia, you need something a bit more hardy at trying to crack those difficult sleep habits you get into. It's kind of like a process of retraining of sleep. And when you're in insomnia, you need that rather than, like you say, dimming the lights or having some lavender spray. Yeah.
Fantastic. My final question I ask all my guests, Maya, is, because this is called the Positive Perimenopause Podcast, if you could just give the listeners one practical, actionable tip to have a positive perimenopause, what would it be?
I would say that it's about knowing that this is temporary. So holding in mind that this is temporary. And the one thing that I find more helpful than anything else is about perspective taking. So in the middle of the night, it's really hard to get perspective because we start to catastrophize. But if there's anything that you can do in your day which helps you to zoom out, that helps you to allow you to sort of look down and sort of actually say, you know what, there's other stuff that's going on. I've got this big wide world here that I'm just this little creature getting on with my day, that actually is kind of allows you to get some perspective so that you don't get stuck in those kind of awful catastrophizing, this is never going to change, because actually it is a temporary difficulty and it can change.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. If anybody wants to find out more about the Good Sleep Clinic or wants to get in touch with you or come over to your Instagram, where should they come and find you?
Yeah, okay. So you can visit our website, goodsleep.clinic. Also, you can put your email in there and we'll let you know about our menopause course that's coming out really soon. And also, you can find me on Instagram, Dr Maja Sleep or Good Sleep Clinic. And I try to give some little tips on there for sleep as well. So but you can contact us and we can give you some information. So do get in touch if you need some more help.
Yeah, I definitely recommend everyone going and following you on Instagram. You do some great videos, really helpful, kind of short, informative videos, which are definitely very helpful. So thank you so much, Maya, for coming on today. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. Thank you for answering all the questions and sharing your wealth of knowledge. So thank you.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great chatting.
So here are the highlights of the episode. Number 1, in order to go to sleep, we need our breathing rate to slow down, our muscles to relax, our core body temperature to drop by 1 to 2 degrees, and we need our heart rate to slow down. All happen naturally and all signal to our body that it's safe. Number 2, spikes in temperature, which are very common during perimenopause, or worrying, tells our body that it's not safe, and this is what signals your body to wake up. Number 3, Make sure you build up enough sleep pressure during the day so that you can go to sleep more easily and, more importantly, stay asleep. Number 4, you can build sleep pressure by avoiding naps, waking at the same time each day, and taking exercise and being active. Number 5, try and keep your bed as a sacred place. We need to break negative associations of being awake and being in bed. Number 6, if you're not back to sleep in 20 minutes, get up and go into another room and do something quiet. This will help you to reset and break out of vicious cycles of thinking. Number 7, if you're struggling with sleep, be mindful that alcohol will impact your sleep quality, particularly our REM sleep, which is important for your emotional regulation. Number 8, eating late at night can affect your digestion, and this can impact also your sleep quality. And number 9, be kind to yourself, because even if you're doing all the sleep hygiene recommendations, it doesn't necessarily positively impact insomnia. This is a signal perhaps to seek professional help. I will put all of Maja's contact details into the show notes. Please do let us know what you found useful in this episode. If you've got any further questions, please do get in touch. If you want to get in touch with me, all of my details are also in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, I'd be so grateful if you could leave me a review over on Apple Podcasts. It really does help get this podcast out there, and or rate and follow this podcast as well. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and I really can't wait to speak to you next time. Take care. Bye.